My name is Megan Cassidy and welcome to 15 with 50/50. I am a teacher and an author and one of the publishers with 50/50 Press. The other publisher and the other half of the team is Stephen Hall, and this is the first in our video blog series. Sometimes it'll just be me like today, other times it'll be Steve, and sometimes it'll be the two of us together. We wanted to do a video blog because we had an online blog for a little while, and we wanted just a different way to reach out to people and connect with readers and other writers and publishers and people who just love books and love talking about books and talking about reading and talking about writing. So what we're basically going to do is set up this video blog so that each day for 15 minutes, we'll answer a question or two that we get a lot of times from our readers. And hopefully it'll give some insights into writing and the publishing process, and possibly just some good talk about books every now and then. So if you have a question that you'd like us to answer, you can put that right into the comments here on YouTube or on our website. And we hope to hear back from you. And if you ever have questions, we hope that we can answer them. So a little bit about me before I get started in answering our first question. I have been teaching at the college level for over 10 years. I teach developmental reading and writing and composition 1 and 2 in terms of my writing classes and creative writing. It should be obvious. And I also teach American literature and children's literature and young adult literature as well. So I do a little bit of everything. It's a community college. This is just great to be able to be what they call a generalist, which means you teach a lot of different things. It keeps things interesting for sure. In terms of my writing, I have published some poems and some short stories, and I actually write for different ages. So my first book was a young adult novel called Always Jessie, and that was published with a different publisher last year. And that is a book that was inspired by some of my experiences as a young adult and a teen. I had an eating disorder and I went through treatment for that, and I wanted to write a book about a person who had an eating disorder but who was getting better, and talk about that process of recovery, which was something I didn't see in a lot of books. And I'll be talking about that more in a different podcast, but not as much today, where I have a question that somebody has asked me for today's blog. My second book, The Misadventures of Marvin Miller, comes out next week. And that is a book for middle grade readers, and we'll be talking in another blog podcast here about what middle grade is and how it's different from children's and different from young adults, and why I love middle grade books. We'll be talking about that. I also have an adult book coming out later this year, which is a mystery, and we'll talk about adult books too. So we sort of will span everything, and depending especially on what questions people have. So today I wanted to talk a little bit more about publishing. And one of the questions that I get a lot as a publisher with 50/50 Press is, what should I do for query letters? I have a lot of emerging authors and even some established authors ask about this. How do I best do a query letter? How should I set one up? And what should be included? What should I write to you when I pitch you my book or my story? So I have a few things that I would recommend doing before you send the query letter. And the first thing is really make sure before you send a query letter, and also before, if you participate in some of the Twitter pitch contests, which are so much fun, and we like to participate in those, but think of that as a query too. And before you query, make sure that your manuscript is ready. I see a lot of people who have great ideas, but their manuscripts just aren't polished yet. And I think that sometimes as writers, we hit the period on the last sentence, and it's a book that we've been working on for a long time, and we're passionate about it, and we want to share it with people, and we want it to be read. And so we send it out right away. but it might not be quite ready. So I really encourage people to do a couple things before you send a manuscript in. Have some beta readers, have a writing critique group. We're going to talk a little bit more about those in another blog entry as well, more about how to find a good writing critique group and how to find good beta readers and how to ask beta readers the right questions to get feedback about your manuscript. But make sure that you edit it. Your first draft should not be the one that you send out. You really, even if you feel like you don't have any big developmental changes like characters or plot holes to fix, you're still going to need to make sure that you proofread it before you send it out. So that's one of the first things that I tell people to do. Make sure that your manuscript is prepared. The second thing before sending the query letter is really research the person that you're sending it to. And the third thing, kind of going along with this, you should know whether you want to send it to a small publisher like 50/50 Press or any of the other amazing small publishers that are out there, or if you want to send it to an agent. You really should not be sending it to agents and publishers at the same time for a couple of reasons. A publisher is meant to help you directly, and we do sometimes work with agents and sometimes we work with individuals. But the real problem is that if someone comes to us and submits a work and then they decide that they want to submit it to an agent at the same time, the agent might have other people in mind for that manuscript, which then means that we might get to a certain part of the process with you if you also submitted it to an agent at the same time, and then that process kind of gets derailed. But the other and more important reason is that if you're working with an agent, the agent is there to help you find a publisher. And if you send it to a publisher at the same time and they say no, and then the agent says to you, hey, there's this cool small publisher, 50/50 Press, that I wanted you to submit this to, and let's work on your query letter and get things together. And you're like, oh, I already submitted to them and they said no, then that's a problem for the agent because some of the contacts that they've had then they can't use. So it can be frustrating for them as well. So just know the differences between agents and publishers and know which one you want to submit it to, and do research too. For our press, we start with middle grade novels and then we do young adult and adult, but we don't do younger children's books. And right now we don't do graphic novels or picture books either. And we get a lot of queries for picture books, which are just never going to be a good fit because we don't do picture books. So that's one place where you're researching, you have a picture book, you find us, that's not going to work. Make sure that you really read who the people are. There are some predatory publishers as well that require you to pay them, and you should never pay to have your work published. Sometimes you might later on, if you want like copies for author signings and stuff, you might have to buy them from the publisher at a discount and then you resell them. But that's a lot different than people who ask you for money to edit your book, money to do the cover, money to distribute it, money to market it. You shouldn't be paying those people. And that's another place where research is really, really important. I know a lot of people who have fallen into scams with predatory vanity presses, and it can be really problematic. So make sure you research your publisher. But in terms of the actual query letter, there are 7 things that you should do. The first thing is called a logline. Sometimes you'll see this in movies. It's basically one sentence that summarizes your whole book and lets people know what it's about. And if you are doing Twitter pitches, you probably have this part down because you have to talk about your book in 140 characters, which is so difficult to do with all your characters and plots and subplots. But really get it down to one line. So for example, we have this book coming up next spring that is called Undercover Chefs, and it is told from 3 different points of view. So it's hard to describe in one sentence. But what the author did was she just kind of took that and condensed it. And she said, I have a book about 3 misfit kids who meet up after school and enter a cupcake competition to save the culinary classroom from being destroyed and to save their favorite teacher from losing his job. And I was like, I know what it is right away. I know the age range from that. I know the special interest that that's going to have, and I know what the stakes are. So that is a really good example of a logline that tells you everything in one sentence. The summary comes after the logline. So the summary is not the same as a synopsis. If a publisher or agent asks you for a synopsis, that's a 1-page detailed description of your book. A synopsis tells you the beginning, the middle, the end, every single plot point. A summary doesn't do that. A summary is more like a teaser or a trailer, right? Depending on what you call it. So you're telling me 1 to 2 character names, the most important plot points, and the stakes. That is the most important thing. You have to know what the stakes are for your characters. What's going to happen if they don't meet their goals? Or what are they trying to achieve? That's a piece, and you don't want to tell me what happens, or any publisher or agent in the query letter. You want to tease it and not give away the whole ending. After that, after you do a summary, and a summary should really only be a paragraph, 2 at the most if it's a longer book. After that, you should have the length, the age range. This is really important. There are some publishers that won't take books that are over 100,000 words. There are others that want a middle grade book, for example, for like 3rd to 5th grade to be maybe 30,000 words or 20. So you really need to, again, do your research and know if the length of your book is appropriate. But you should give the length, the age range, and then also you can give comps. Comps are comparable titles. So these are things that could compare to your book. And I think they're used most effectively when they're not a huge blockbuster and you're not saying something like, my book is the next Harry Potter, which most books are not going to be. But if you use something that's recent and similar to your title, but still there's a difference, that can really be helpful. I have heard other agents and publishers say that they don't like comps because sometimes they hate the book that the manuscript is compared to. But I think it can kind of be helpful to place your book. We have this amazing book called Threadwalkers coming out, and she compared her book to a more modern take on Wrinkle in Time. And when I read the first chapter, I was like, she's right. It's a lot like Wrinkle in Time in some of the themes of time travel and space-time movement, but it's not exactly the same. So it was a good comparison in that case. After you do your comps, then you should talk about why you have submitted your book to that publisher in particular. So why us? What did you like about our website? What did you like about, on our website, we have our mission statement. We have our first 14 books up and ready. So maybe you saw a book on there that is a book that you really liked, or maybe you think that you like our mission statement of helping authors and helping authors to achieve their vision and treating books like they're bestsellers, even though we're a smaller press. Maybe you go on another site for a different publisher and they publish something a little bit more in a niche market, like Christian mysteries or science fiction fantasy for women, and that's where your book falls. Tell them that and tell them distinctly why you picked them. It shouldn't be just, you know, putting it out to every single publisher you could find who had submissions open. You really should know this is going to be a relationship between you and the publisher if your book gets picked up, and it should be a good fit for both of you. After that, then you can talk about yourself a little bit. if you have a platform, which we'll talk about again in another video, if you have a platform, that can be really helpful to know. Maybe you've written other things. We have an author, Aaron Davis, who is a speaker, and the book is part of his whole brand of being a speaker and being a minister and traveling and talking about depression in churches. And so we knew right away, like, he's already going to have an audience because he's been speaking at all these different places. But you don't have to have a platform like that. We have another person who does a podcast, Daniel Ford, and he has a platform kind of set up already. But we also have authors where this is their first book, and you know, they talk instead about their experiences and what led them to write this book, or they'll talk just a little bit about maybe other shorter works that they've written, maybe if they have short stories or poems, or we have a person who might still be in college but is going for creative writing, and you know, this is a piece that they've already written. So it's good to just talk about yourself a little bit, like maybe 3 sentences, 2 to 3 sentences, maybe more if you have a larger platform and it's really part of your book, or if you're writing about something like science fiction, it has to do with physics and you're a physics professor, include something like that. But a couple sentences, and then the last part's just the thanks and the closing. Your query letter should be about 1 page, and I always recommend to people that they go on websites like Query Shark to read other examples and see what other people have done. So that's my advice for how to write a query letter, and I hope that answers the question for some of the people who asked me on Facebook and through our email and things like that. If you have questions, again, feel free to put them in the comments below, and we hope to see you again next week. Have a great day.